"Be quick," she shouted. The cowboy obeyed. But the Apache woman couldn't bear the pain. Wild West. The silence of the desert was broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the soft thud of hooves striking the hard, cracked earth. A lone cowboy rode carefully along the winding path, his wide-brimmed hat tilted low over his face to shield him from the glaring sun. His horse, a sturdy brown mare with white markings on her face, moved steadily, sensing its rider's cautious mood. The cowboy had been traveling for hours without seeing another soul. This stretch of land was unforgiving. Steep cliffs rose on one side, while jagged rocks and sparse scrub stretched to the horizon on the other. He had been following a trade route, hoping to reach the small settlement of Mesa Springs before nightfall. But as he rode, something caught his eye, a flash of movement near a cluster of boulders to the side of the trail. He slowed his horse and squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first he thought it was just a trick of the sun on the rocks, but then he saw her. A woman crouched low, pressing herself against the stones. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled and dusty. She looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes, and for a moment the cowboy felt a pang of concern. The woman was clearly in pain. She moved gingerly, almost as if every step caused her suffering. Her hands trembled as she tried to support herself, and the cowboy noticed a dark stain spreading across the front of her dress. She was hurt. He could tell immediately. He dismounted slowly, letting the reins fall over his horse's neck. He kept his hands visible, showing he meant no harm. "Are you all right?" he called gently. His voice was low but firm, carrying across the small distance. The woman flinched, then whispered something he could barely hear. He stepped closer, noticing how thin and worn she looked, yet there was a fire in her eyes. Despite the pain, she had not lost her spirit. Her eyes held a sharp intelligence, and there was a quiet strength about her that made him pause. She was not just a victim, she was a survivor. The cowboy knelt a few feet away, careful not to frighten her. "I can help you," he said, "but you have to trust me." Then in a strained voice she said, "Be quick." He didn't know for sure, but the woman's fear was real, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. "Don't worry," he said, "I'll get you out of here." He tore a strip from his shirt, cleaning the wound as best he could, and then wrapped it tightly to slow the bleeding. The woman winced, biting her lip to hold back a cry. "You'll be all right if we move quickly," he said. "Can you walk a little, or do you need help?" The desert was full of dangers, snakes, wild animals, and people who might not hesitate to take advantage of a wounded woman. He knew he had to get her to safety before night fell. He helped her onto his horse carefully, making sure she was secure without causing more pain. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists, trying to remain steady, but the cowboy could see how much she was suffering. He felt a mix of admiration and concern. Despite everything, she was enduring, holding onto her dignity even in pain. As they rode along the trail, the woman's breathing was shallow, and every bump of the horse caused her to wince. The cowboy kept his pace slow but steady, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. He noticed vultures circling in the distance, a silent reminder of how unforgiving the desert could be. He had learned long ago that survival depended on quick thinking, skill, and sometimes a bit of luck. He glanced at the woman beside him. Her dark hair fell across her face, streaked with dust and blood. Her eyes were focused on the ground, but occasionally she looked up at him, trust slowly forming between them. He wanted to speak, to reassure her, but words felt small compared to the reality of the moment. Silence, he realized, was sometimes the strongest companion in a world full of uncertainty. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the canyon walls. The wind grew cooler, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. The cowboy's muscles ached and his horse was tired, but he pressed on. He had promised to keep her safe, and he would not break that promise. The woman shifted slightly, and he noticed her eyes glistening with tears. "It hurts," she whispered. "I know," he replied softly. "I know it does, but you're strong. You'll make it." He had seen suffering before, but there was something different about this woman. She had faced danger, loss, and pain with a determination that left a lasting impression. He realized that survival was not just about strength. It was about will, courage, and the refusal to give up, no matter how difficult the road. Night began to fall, painting the desert in deep shades of purple and blue. Stars appeared one by one, twinkling like tiny lanterns in the vast sky. The cool night air provided some relief, but it also reminded the cowboy that darkness brought new dangers. He tightened his grip on the reins, guiding the horse steadily. The woman leaned slightly against him, her trust evident in the small gestures she allowed. It was a fragile bond, but it was there, a connection born from shared struggle and the urgent need to survive. He respected her resilience and felt a deep responsibility to protect her. As they approached a small clearing, he spotted what looked like an abandoned cabin in the distance. It was not much, but it promised shelter and safety for the night. He urged the horse forward, careful to avoid rocks and uneven ground. The woman held on tightly, and he could feel the tension in her body. He whispered, "Almost there, just a little further." Inside, the cabin was dusty and worn, but it was safe from the desert elements. He helped her sit on a makeshift bench, then checked her injury again. He had done what he could for now, and she was stable. The woman looked at him, gratitude shining through her pain. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes said everything. The cowboy nodded, understanding that sometimes words were unnecessary. In that quiet cabin, with the desert night stretching endlessly outside, two strangers had found a fragile moment of safety. For the first time that day, the woman allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning back and closing her eyes. The cowboy stayed nearby, keeping watch, knowing that the desert could change in an instant. But for now, there was a sense of calm, a small victory in a harsh world. And as the wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls, the cowboy realized something important. The journey ahead would be difficult, and danger was far from over. But for this moment, they had survived. And sometimes, in the unforgiving land of the Wild West, survival was everything. The night air in the cabin was cool, and the faint glow of the stars spilled through the cracks in the wooden walls. The cowboy kept watch, sitting quietly near the doorway. The horse he had tied outside shifted occasionally, stamping its hooves softly on the hard ground. Inside, the Apache woman sat on the bench, wrapped in a worn blanket the cowboy had brought from his saddlebag. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and the pain in her eyes had not disappeared, yet there was a slight sense of relief that she was alive and safe for now. The cowboy studied her carefully, realizing that her strength went beyond physical endurance. She had survived countless hardships, and even now, though hurt, she remained composed. He respected that deeply. She, in turn, studied him. She saw the lines on his face from years of sun, wind, and hard labor, the way he moved with careful caution, and the quiet determination in his eyes. Though strangers, they had formed a bond, a fragile trust built from necessity and shared survival. "Do you want some water?" the cowboy asked, his voice low and calm. He poured a little from his canteen into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it slowly, sipping in small amounts, careful not to upset her injury. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had endured more than most could imagine. There was something in her tone that told him she was not only grateful but also aware of the danger that still surrounded them. The cowboy nodded. "We should rest for a while. We'll need our strength for tomorrow." The wind howled outside, whistling through the canyon and rattling the loose boards of the cabin. The sound was eerie, but inside it brought a strange comfort, a reminder that they were protected, at least for now. As the hours passed, the woman's eyes grew heavy. She leaned back, closing them for a brief moment, and the cowboy kept his gaze on the door, listening to every sound. He had learned on the frontier that the quietest moments often held the greatest danger, but he also knew that rest was essential for survival. He allowed himself to think about her story. Though she had not shared it in detail, small glimpses were revealed in her expressions, her pauses, and the way she carried herself. She had known loss, perhaps in the form of family or friends taken too soon. She had faced challenges that had hardened her but not broken her spirit. The cowboy felt a deep sense of admiration for her resilience. When she stirred slightly, he gently asked, "Do you need anything?" The desert was unforgiving, and every step they would take tomorrow would demand energy, courage, and careful planning. He quietly moved to the corner, taking out a small bundle of supplies from his saddlebag. He prepared a simple meal, a few biscuits and dried meat, knowing they would need nourishment before the journey resumed. The woman watched him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and cautious trust. She had seen many strangers, some kind, others cruel, but this man was different. He treated her with respect, not pity, and that mattered more than words could express. As dawn approached, the first pale light of morning crept through the cracks in the cabin walls. The cowboy stirred, checking on her. Her breathing was steady, and the bandage he had applied the previous day had slowed the bleeding. He felt a quiet relief. Though the journey ahead would be difficult, they had made it through the night. "Time to move," he said gently. "We need to reach the river before the sun gets too high." Every movement caused a slight wince, but she did not complain. She adjusted herself carefully on the horse, allowing him to guide her down the narrow trail that led out of the canyon. The desert was awakening around them, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals, and the gentle hum of the wind through the scrub. It was beautiful but unforgiving, and they had to stay alert. The cowboy led the horse carefully, scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. He noticed tracks in the dust, some fresh, some older. It was impossible to know who had passed through recently, but he knew caution was essential. He kept the horse on a narrow ridge, where they could see the land stretching ahead while remaining partially hidden. The woman stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Every now and then she would glance at him, her expression a mix of determination and apprehension. He understood. She had been forced to rely on strangers before, and trust was not given easily. Yet she had placed her life in his hands, and he respected the weight of that decision. Hours passed as they navigated the rocky terrain. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the canyon walls. The heat was intense, and the cowboy made sure they stopped occasionally to rest and drink water. He shared the small supply he had, careful not to run out before reaching the river. The woman accepted it silently, conserving her energy for the journey ahead. Along the way, they encountered signs of recent activity, broken branches, footprints in the dust, and the remnants of a small campfire. The cowboy knew they were not far from danger. He kept a watchful eye, adjusting their path to avoid any possible threat. The woman remained calm, trusting his judgment, though her body betrayed her with every small movement. By midday, they reached a shallow ravine where a small stream trickled through the rocks. The water was clear, and the cowboy helped the woman down carefully. She knelt beside the stream, washing her hands and face, and he watched her closely, ready to assist if needed. The relief in her eyes was clear. The cool water was a small comfort in the harsh desert environment. They rested for a while, eating a small meal and drinking water. The cowboy spoke little, but occasionally he shared stories of his travels, of times he had faced danger and survived. The woman listened quietly, and for a moment there was a sense of normalcy, two people sharing a brief respite in a world filled with uncertainty. As they prepared to continue, the cowboy adjusted her bandages, making sure they were secure. "We're close to the next settlement," he said. "It won't be much longer before you're safe." Action spoke louder than words, and survival was the only measure that mattered in the desert. The journey continued, slow and careful, as they navigated rocky paths and narrow trails. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became more intense, but they pressed on. The woman's endurance was remarkable. Despite her injury, she remained determined to keep moving, trusting the cowboy to guide her safely. By late afternoon, they saw signs of civilization in the distance, a few scattered buildings, smoke rising from a small chimney. Relief washed over both of them. The journey had been difficult, and danger had been near at every turn, but they had survived. As they approached the small settlement, the cowboy helped the woman down from the horse. She stood unsteadily, but she was smiling faintly, a small victory in a harsh world. People in the settlement noticed them and came forward to help, bringing water and tending to her injury more thoroughly. The cowboy watched for a moment, ensuring she was in safe hands. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Though the desert was harsh and unforgiving, they had made it through together. The bond formed through shared struggle was evident, and even in silence it spoke volumes about courage, trust, and human connection. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I will never forget this," she said softly. He nodded, tipping his hat. "Just survive. That's what matters." Though the day had been long and exhausting, it marked the beginning of a story that would remain with both of them forever. A story of endurance, courage, and the quiet strength of human spirit in the heart of the Wild West. The settlement they had reached was small but welcoming. Simple wooden cabins stood on uneven ground, and smoke curled from the chimneys, carrying the scent of cooked food into the air. Children played near a water trough, their laughter ringing clear in the midday sun. Farmers worked in small plots of land, tending to crops and animals, and the occasional horse whinnied in the distance. It was a peaceful place, a stark contrast to the harsh desert they had just crossed. The cowboy helped the Apache woman to a bench near one of the cabins. Villagers approached cautiously, some curious, others concerned. They had seen travelers before, but a wounded woman from the desert accompanied by a stranger was unusual. The cowboy explained briefly what had happened, keeping the story simple, but enough for them to understand the urgency of her situation. A kind older woman stepped forward, carrying a cloth bundle. "We can tend to her injuries properly," she said softly. "She'll be safe here." Though she had faced many dangers, kindness was rare, and she recognized it immediately. The cowboy helped her sit on the ground while the woman attended to her, cleaning the wound and applying fresh bandages. The pain made the Apache woman flinch, but she remained calm, focusing on breathing slowly and steadying herself. The cowboy watched quietly, giving her space while ensuring nothing else disturbed her. He had learned long ago that trust and patience were as important as speed and strength in survival. Even the gentlest acts, done with respect, could make a world of difference. Once her injuries were cleaned and secured, the older woman offered water and a simple meal. The Apache woman accepted, eating slowly, aware that her strength was still limited. The cowboy stayed nearby, vigilant but relaxed. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to notice the settlement in detail. The wooden fence surrounding the main area, the way smoke drifted lazily into the sky, and the quiet, steady rhythm of life here. It was a small pocket of safety in a vast and dangerous land. As she ate, the Apache woman began to speak, her voice quiet but steady. She told fragments of her story, carefully chosen, not revealing everything. She spoke of her family, of the struggles she had faced, and the harsh reality of life in the desert. The cowboy listened intently, respecting the limits of what she was willing to share. He had seen many travelers with tragic stories, but there was something about her courage that stayed with him. "I was traveling to meet my family," she said finally. "But there were others, people who didn't want me to reach them. I ran, but I was hurt. That's what matters." The cowboy would help her reach the next town where her family might be. She agreed, grateful for the help but wary of traveling again so soon. The cowboy knew the journey would be difficult. The terrain beyond the settlement was uneven and rugged, and dangers, wild animals, harsh weather, and hostile travelers were still possible. But he had experience in these lands, and he knew that careful planning could make the difference between life and death. They stayed in the settlement overnight, the Apache woman resting on a makeshift bed provided by the villagers. The cowboy kept watch outside, listening to the quiet sounds of the night, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the faint murmur of the wind through the trees. It was calm, but he knew the peace was temporary. The desert was waiting, and their journey had only just begun. Morning arrived with a pale light that spread across the settlement. The cowboy checked the woman's bandages and made sure she was ready for travel. Though still weak, she was determined to continue. Her resilience impressed him, and he felt a growing respect for her courage and willpower. As they prepared to leave, villagers approached to offer food and advice for the journey ahead. One man handed them a small map, pointing out safer trails and warning of areas where trouble had been reported. The cowboy nodded, storing the map carefully in his satchel. Knowledge of the land was a valuable tool, sometimes more important than weapons or supplies. They set off slowly, moving through the trails outside the settlement. The Apache woman rode cautiously, leaning slightly on the cowboy when necessary. The terrain was uneven with loose rocks and narrow paths, but they moved steadily. The sun climbed higher, making the air warmer, but they were careful to rest in shaded areas whenever possible. As they traveled, the cowboy shared stories of his past adventures. He spoke of rivers he had crossed, mountains he had climbed, and deserts he had survived. The woman listened quietly, occasionally asking questions. Though her body ached, her mind remained sharp, and she absorbed the information with careful attention. Hours passed, and the desert began to stretch endlessly before them. The heat was strong, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Despite this, the woman pressed on, her determination clear. The cowboy admired her strength. He had seen many travelers give up when faced with difficulties, but she endured, driven by her need to reach safety. Along the way, they encountered challenges. A narrow path along a cliff tested their balance, forcing them to move slowly and carefully. Loose stones slid under the horse's hooves, and the woman clutched the cowboy tightly, trusting him completely. He guided the horse, steady and calm, ensuring they passed safely. Later, they crossed a dry riverbed where the sun reflected harshly off the rocks. The woman stumbled slightly, but the cowboy caught her just in time. "Careful," he said softly. "We're almost through this part." The cowboy led the horse carefully to the water, letting it drink, while the woman rested under the shade of a tree. The sound of flowing water was soothing, and for a moment they both allowed themselves to relax. The cowboy took out some dried meat and biscuits from his satchel, offering some to the woman. She ate slowly, regaining a bit of strength. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts about the journey ahead. Despite the danger and exhaustion, there was a growing sense of camaraderie between them, a silent understanding that they depended on each other to survive. As night fell, the stars appeared, bright and clear in the desert sky. The cowboy set up a small camp, ensuring they were safe from wild animals. He kept watch while the woman slept lightly, still recovering from her injuries. The desert was quiet, and the only sounds were the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft trickle of the creek. The cowboy reflected on their journey so far. He had faced many dangers in his life, but this journey was different. It was not only about survival, it was about protecting someone who could not defend herself, about guiding her through a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The responsibility weighed on him, but he did not falter. By dawn, the woman was awake and they prepared to continue. Though still weak, she was determined, and the cowboy admired her spirit. Together, they faced the next part of the journey, ready to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. The desert was vast and unpredictable, but their trust in each other was growing stronger with every step. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a warm, golden light across the rocky terrain. The cowboy and the Apache woman were already on the trail, moving carefully along a narrow path that twisted between cliffs and low shrubs. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. The journey so far had tested their endurance, but they were growing stronger with each mile. The woman still moved cautiously, every step a reminder of the injury she carried, but her determination never wavered. The cowboy led the way, scanning the horizon constantly. The desert could change in an instant. A sudden storm, a hidden cliff, or a wild animal could appear without warning. Experience had taught him that vigilance was as important as speed. The woman trusted him completely, her hands gripping the reins tightly, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. He could sense her inner strength, even as her body ached from the long journey. As they moved, the path became more treacherous. Loose stones slid under the horse's hooves, and the narrow trail forced them close to the edge of a steep drop. The woman tensed with every step, and the cowboy kept his voice calm. "Careful here," he said. "One wrong step and it could be dangerous." They had survived nights in the desert, pain and exhaustion, and together they had grown resilient. By midday, the heat had grown intense. The sun beat down relentlessly, making the rocks and dirt radiate warmth. The cowboy scanned the horizon and spotted a small grove of trees near a creek, a place to rest and drink. Relief washed over both of them. The woman's strength had been tested to its limit, and she welcomed the shade. They dismounted carefully, letting the horse drink from the creek. The woman knelt beside it, cupping the cool water in her hands to refresh herself. The cowboy watched, ensuring they were safe, but also allowing her a brief moment of comfort. He knew that the journey ahead would demand more strength, and he wanted her as prepared as possible. As they rested, the cowboy shared more stories of the desert, how he had survived storms, found water in dry places, and faced dangers without giving up. The woman listened, occasionally asking questions. Despite the pain she carried, her mind remained alert. She absorbed every word, learning from his experience, understanding the land in a way only someone who relied on it for survival could. After a short meal of dried meat and biscuits, they prepared to continue. The path ahead was more difficult than anything they had faced so far. The desert cliffs rose higher, and the narrow trail twisted along steep slopes. They would have to be careful, every step requiring focus and caution. The cowboy led the horse slowly, guiding the woman along the safest path. A sudden gust of wind blew dust into their faces, making it difficult to see. The woman's grip tightened on the reins, but she didn't panic. Step by step, they pressed forward, relying on experience and trust. Suddenly they heard a noise, a low rustle from behind a nearby boulder. The cowboy froze, signaling the woman to stay calm. They both listened carefully, aware that danger could appear at any moment. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, two figures approaching. They were travelers, but the cowboy could not tell if they meant harm or help. He whispered to the woman, "Stay close. Let me handle this." The woman nodded silently, leaning slightly against him for reassurance. The cowboy stepped forward slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. The figures stopped and revealed themselves to be friendly travelers, carrying supplies to a nearby settlement. The cowboy exhaled in relief, and the woman relaxed slightly. The encounter reminded them both that the desert was unpredictable. Danger could appear without warning, but not everything was a threat. They continued on the trail, now more cautious but also more aware of their surroundings. The journey demanded constant attention, patience, and determination. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the trail became even more challenging. Loose stones and uneven ground slowed their pace, and the woman's injury caused her to stumble occasionally. The cowboy guided the horse carefully, steadying her whenever necessary. "Almost there," he said gently. "Keep going, we're making good progress." Each step was difficult, but giving up was not an option. Her courage impressed the cowboy, who had seen many travelers falter under far less pressure. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley below. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills, scattered trees, and a distant stream glinting in the sunlight. For a moment, they paused, taking in the sight. The cowboy and the woman shared a quiet smile, a small victory in a harsh and unforgiving land. But their journey was not over. The trail descended sharply into the valley, and the horse had to navigate narrow paths along steep cliffs. The woman's injury made it more difficult, and the cowboy remained close, guiding her with careful precision. Step by step, they moved downward, each movement requiring focus, patience, and trust. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, the cowboy noticed signs of movement in the distance, wild animals perhaps, or travelers. He adjusted their path, steering them toward a safer route. The woman leaned against him, trusting his judgment completely. They moved slowly, carefully, aware that one mistake could lead to disaster. Finally, they reached a small grove near the base of the valley. A stream flowed gently, and trees provided shelter from the remaining sunlight. The cowboy helped the woman down from the horse, and she sat on the ground, exhausted but grateful. He tended to her bandages, making sure they were secure, and she rested, her body finally able to recover from the long day's journey. As night fell, the desert transformed. The temperature dropped and the stars appeared, bright and clear against the dark sky. The cowboy set up a small camp near the stream, ensuring they were safe from wild animals. He kept watch while the woman slept lightly, exhausted from the day's challenges. The sound of the flowing water was soothing, and for the first time in many days, they both felt a sense of calm. The cowboy reflected on the journey so far. They had faced pain, danger, and exhaustion, yet they had survived. The woman's courage and determination had carried them through, and his experience had guided them safely. Together, they had formed a bond stronger than words, a connection forged through shared struggle and trust. Morning arrived with the promise of a new day. The cowboy checked the woman's condition and helped her prepare for the final part of their journey. Though her injury was still present, her strength had returned enough to continue. They mounted the horse carefully, ready to face whatever challenges remained ahead. As they rode, the cowboy and the woman moved silently, each lost in thought but aware of the other's presence. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of rocks, sand, and distant mountains. Despite the hardships, there was hope. Hope that safety and family were within reach. Hope that the desert would finally release them from its trials. And with each step forward, they continued their journey together, facing danger, enduring pain, and relying on the unspoken bond that had formed between them. The Wild West was harsh and unpredictable, but together they had found strength, courage, and the will to survive. The morning sun spilled over the desert, painting the land in soft shades of gold and amber. The cowboy and the Apache woman rose early, ready to continue their journey. The previous day had tested their strength, but both had survived, and hope now guided their steps. The woman's injury was still tender, but with rest and care, she was ready to move. Together, they prepared the horse, checking its saddlebags for food and water. The desert stretched before them, vast and unending. Rocky ridges gave way to flat plains, and distant mountains shimmered in the heat. The cowboy led the way, constantly scanning the horizon for obstacles or signs of danger. Though the land was harsh, he had learned to read it like a map. Every slope, every shadow, every trace of movement could tell a story, and he used that knowledge to keep them safe. The Apache woman stayed close, holding the reins tightly. Though her steps were careful, her eyes were bright with determination. She had come far, and now the thought of reaching safety and reuniting with family gave her strength. The cowboy noticed her focus and admired it silently. Her courage was remarkable, but he also knew that the journey was not over yet. As they moved across the plains, a sudden gust of wind blew dust into their faces. The horse shied slightly, and the woman clutched the cowboy instinctively. "Easy," he said, patting the horse's neck. "We're fine, just a little wind." Her endurance impressed the cowboy. He had faced many travelers on the frontier, but few showed such unwavering determination. By midday, they reached a small cluster of trees where a creek flowed through the land. The water sparkled in the sunlight, a welcome sight after the long journey. The cowboy led the horse to the creek to drink, and the woman knelt beside it, cupping the cool water in her hands to refresh herself. The relief was clear on her face. For a brief moment, the heat and fatigue of the desert faded away. While they rested, the cowboy spoke quietly. "We're getting close," he said. "Not far now, and you'll be safe." The land grew more familiar to the woman with each step. She recognized signs of nearby settlements. the smell of smoke, faint paths worn into the earth, and small clusters of trees where people might have built homes. Her pace quickened slightly, not because she was fully recovered, but because her hope and determination were driving her forward. The cowboy noticed the change, smiling faintly. "Good," he said. "Keep moving, we're almost there." She leaned slightly against him for support, and he offered gentle words of encouragement. "Almost through this," he said. "You're doing well, just a little further." Though exhausted, the woman pressed on, relying on her strength and the cowboy's guidance. At last, the canyon opened into a wide valley. In the distance, a small settlement appeared, a cluster of wooden buildings with smoke rising from chimneys. Farmers worked in their fields and children played near the water. The sight brought relief and joy to the woman's eyes. She had reached safety. The cowboy helped her down from the horse, steadying her as she stood on solid ground. Her legs trembled slightly, but she smiled, the first true smile in many days. Villagers noticed them and came forward, offering water and assistance. The cowboy explained briefly about her injury and their journey, keeping the story simple. People hurried to provide care and comfort, and the woman was finally able to rest in a safe place. As the villagers tended to her, the cowboy stepped back, giving her space. He watched silently, proud of her courage and endurance. She had survived the harsh desert, pain, and exhaustion, and now she would recover fully. He knew that her journey had changed her, and he felt honored to have helped her reach this point. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will never forget you." The journey had been difficult and danger had been constant, but together they had overcome every obstacle. The cowboy had guided her, protected her, and witnessed her courage. In return, she had shown resilience, trust, and determination that inspired him deeply. The villagers provided food, clean water, and a safe place for the woman to recover. Her injury was treated thoroughly, and she began to regain her strength. Days passed, and with each one she grew stronger, her spirit lifted by the kindness of those around her. The cowboy visited occasionally, checking on her progress and offering guidance for the next part of her journey to reunite with family. Eventually, the day came when she was strong enough to travel again. The cowboy helped her prepare, packing provisions and ensuring the horse was ready. The settlement's people waved as she departed, wishing her safety and good fortune. Though the journey ahead remained long, she now faced it with renewed strength and hope. The cowboy watched her ride away, the sun casting long shadows across the valley. He reflected on their journey together, how danger had tested them, how endurance and trust had carried them forward, and how courage had shaped their path. Though they would go separate ways, the experience remained a shared memory, a testament to the human spirit in the face of adversity. As the woman disappeared into the horizon, the cowboy turned back to the desert. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and full of challenges, but it was also a place of beauty, resilience, and opportunity. He mounted his horse, ready to continue his own journey, knowing that he had made a difference in someone's life, and that the bonds formed in hardship could last far longer than the journey itself. And so, the desert returned to silence, the wind carrying the story of two travelers who had faced pain, danger, and uncertainty, yet emerged stronger, braver, and connected in a way that only shared struggle could create. Life in the Wild West was never easy, but moments like these, moments of courage, trust, and human kindness, reminded those who lived there of the power of endurance, hope, and the quiet strength within every person. The Apache woman rode toward her family, her heart lighter and her spirit stronger. She had survived the desert, the injury, and the unknown dangers along the trail. Every step forward was a victory, every mile a testament to her courage. She carried with her the memory of the cowboy who had helped her, the lessons she had learned, and the determination that had carried her through. For the cowboy, life in the desert continued. He would face new trails, new challenges, and new travelers in need of guidance. Yet the memory of the Apache woman's resilience remained with him, a reminder that courage could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the bonds formed through shared struggle were among the strongest in the world. And so, the story of their journey concluded, not with fanfare or celebration, but with quiet reflection, survival, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The desert remained as vast and challenging as ever, but for those who faced it with courage.